everyone, it is Em here from Edventerous Minds, and today we are talking about what are high impact teaching strategies, also known in the biz as HITs. Today we're going to go through what the 10 HITs are and how you can implement them in your classroom this week. High impact teaching strategies, HITs, are ways to teach that can reliably improve student outcomes. John Hattie and Robert Mazzano developed these 10 strategies after extensive research. And this research was in a variety of different classrooms, different types of schools, private, public, big classes, tiny classes, all different age groups. They came together, and in the actual assessment of these strategies, they've actually allocated each one of them an impact score, which makes it really easy for you and I, as classroom teachers, to be able to work out which one of these types of strategies we should focus on in terms of getting our kids up to scratch. All right, let's talk about the first one. And the first one that John Hattie and Robert Bazzano talk about is this concept of setting goals. Now, we all know how important it is for students to set their own learning goals, both short term and long term. But it's really important for kids to have an understanding of what's actually going to be expected of them and what their goals are for that lesson on its own and that unit and all of those sorts of things. Goals are going to give kids a bit of a mind map as to where to go. We do this for each individual learning in the form of learning intention. So it tells that kid what they're going to need to understand and do in this particular lesson. Hits number 2 is structuring lessons. Now, this is one of those things that I think every classroom teacher knows we need to do, and to a certain extent, we do it by nature. We introduce the idea to the kids, we get onto that active learning part of it, and hopefully, we have enough time before the bell goes to do that really important recap. Structuring lessons are really important so kids know that the lesson is going to be clear and predictable. They're going to know what they need to do before you even arrive or what they can expect from that particular lesson. And then they don't have to spend that time being anxious about what's going to happen next. They can just focus on the actual learning. And again, the best concept is even just that simplest of initiate, activate, and recap. So we've got that initiate section where you introduce the idea and you start telling them what they're going to do. Then you actively teach them that particular skill. And then at the end, you recap it. Lots of different schools have got different teaching and learning structures within their school, and some of them are more complicated than this really simple breakdown. Some of them are less complicated than that. But as long as there is some sort of structure that your kids can predict from you, then that is in itself a high impact teaching strategy. All right, number 3 is explicit teaching. And this is where you model intended skills. So you actually show them what it is that they're going to need to do. Now, sometimes this can seem super simple. So if you've got a maths problem and you need them to actually do that addition, it's really easy to model how that works. You can do that with counters or with dashes or with a whole range of different things. Can be a little bit trickier when it comes to secondary school literacy and writing and things like that. But what is best is that you demonstrate how it is that they do that particular skill so that they can see it in action. It also means that you check in with students to make sure that they understand along the way, that they've seen you do that skill and they understand the steps involved with it. So explicit teaching is not only modeling those intended skills, but checking in with students along the way. Okay. Number 4 is worked examples. And part of this can be really similar to explicit teaching in that, you go through this process step by step and really work that example out so the students can mimic and model the behavior that you're doing. the skill set that you're showing. But the other way to do this is to have finished products from previous year levels. If you've got possibly, obviously, if you're setting a brand new assessment task, that becomes a little bit trickier. But having something tangible that the kids can read all the way through, can touch and feel and turn around, so they get a really good example of, what the end goal looks like, where they're heading with that particular thing, then that's always going to give them something solid in their mind. There's nothing worse than when you're trying to construct something and you don't know what it's going to look like in the end. If you think about trying to construct an IKEA cupboard, if you'd never seen that cupboard before and you've just got a flat pack set of, planks and screws and an Allen key, it would be really difficult to put that together if you didn't know what it looked like in the end. So worked examples really help our students to have a good idea about what that work should look like and where they're actually heading for. Number 5 is collaborative learning, one of my favorite teaching strategies. I love watching my kids work together. When they work together, what they do is they learn from each other. They come to appreciate that some people have got different skill sets and that they're really useful, and they learn how to do different things together. What it also does is it teaches them about different roles and responsibilities. So if you've got a group of 5 and you actually allocate out, someone needs to be the editor and someone needs to be the reporter and someone needs to be the timekeeper, and you rotate those roles throughout the year, then they do learn how to have a little bit of responsibility, how to contribute productively in those sorts of things. So when they have something that they can take some responsibility for, have a bit of pride in, they're much more likely to be engaged in the group, and the group is likely to hold them accountable, which kind of takes the pressure off you a little bit. If they're holding each other accountable, then you don't have to nag them quite so much, and you can just enjoy watching them be amazing. Number 6 is multiple exposures. And this is a pretty fancy way of basically saying that you want them to see the same skill in new ways. So if you're doing a particular writing style, so for example, you've been teaching teal paragraphing, then you want them to do that in a variety of different options. So you want them to do it about a novel. You want them to do it about a writing style. You want them to get used to doing that same thing over and over again until it effectively becomes muscle memory. But also, what it does is it teaches those kids the style that you are going to ask them to write in and what they can be expected to do. Similarly, if there's a particular formula or function within mathematics, you want to be able to apply that in multiple different circumstances. So worded problems, numbered problems, etc. You want them to be able to apply that same skill, but in a variety of different scenarios. You want them to build a deeper understanding, and this is the best way to do that. It also proves to them that they can apply that same skill in multiple scenarios. If they come up with a scenario that they haven't really seen before, they've got more confidence to be able to apply that skill set that they've now mastered. Number 7, questioning. Questions really encourage thinking. We want kids to be curious. We want them to go out and look for more things. They all carry around a whole computer in their pocket these days. I love the idea that at the end of my lessons, the kids are itching to get back to their lockers and their bags so they can Google something that they learnt in class today and find out a bit more about it. We want to encourage that curiosity. And by forming really good questions and modeling what good questions are, we can help kids to be able to do that thing. The other things that questions do, obviously, is check for understanding to see whether or not they've got that concept or if we need to go back over it again. Sometimes kids can seem really confident at the end of a task, but when you do that questioning, when you ask for that understanding, they really struggle to articulate the actual skill that you're looking for. So, always best to double check before you let them out of your sight. Number 8 is feedback. I think that feedback's really important to be constructive and practical and something that a kid can implement right then, right there in order to make that work better, or something that they can do in the immediate future in order to do better on a similar task in the future. However, one of the best ways to be able to get feedback is to actually guide students to give feedback to peers. Have a think about, what kind of information they might take on, what things they would be able to implement, so that they can not only receive feedback really well, but they can give feedback really well. Often, I ask students to peer assess each other's work and do a reflective task that asks them to think about what did they see in their peers' work that they could take away and improve in their own work. It's a really great task and a really good way to really think about the feedback that they've given and how they can implement that themselves. Number 9 is metacognitive strategies. Often early career teachers tell me this is the hardest ones to implement because whilst they understand that metacognition is thinking about thinking, encouraging our students to think about their own thinking and their own learning and where they're at in terms of those things, it can be really hard to implement in the classroom. And in actual fact, I think that most of us do this without even realizing it. We use graphic organizers to unpack ideas. We use tools and methods and we tell them what they're doing in order to do that. In reality, teal is a thinking process. It's a metacognitive strategy. It's understanding the topic that it is you're writing about. It's explaining that a little bit further. It really does step out your thinking in terms of paragraph writing. So metacognitive strategies are just highlighting to students how they are going about the thinking process of doing this particular task. And number 10 is differentiated teaching. Now, it's really important to remember that differentiated teaching is about adjusting tasks, not changing tasks. Students who need to have tasks adjusted for them, it's about meeting their needs, not about changing things to assess a different skill set. So, really, the task that you give a student that is differentiated should look almost the same as the rest of their classmates with some slight adjustments to change that scenario so that they are able to show off the skill set that they've got in a really valid and authentic way. When you differentiate your teaching, you acknowledge that this particular case, this particular assessment doesn't suit that student in terms of its environment or the parameters or the format. And so you are adjusting it to meet that student's need so they can still demonstrate the skill in the way that is, again, valid and authentic. The differentiated teaching is about adjustment, not reinventing the wheel. So, hits aren't designed to be anything new to most classroom teachers. Like I said, they are probably stuff that you are already doing, which is great. Because they can be a really great way to revamp your planning and reinvigorate your teaching. They can give you something to focus on. Does my unit plan include multiple exposures? How can I increase multiple exposures in my planning? How can I create some worked examples so I can really show my students what I'm expecting of them at the end? Remember, learning is an adventure, and I want you to be able to have this adventure with these high impact teaching strategies. Give them a bit of a go, play with them. Worst case scenario, you do one and it doesn't work and you scrap that. At the end of the day, be honest with your kids, tell them that you're trying something new. Let them come on that adventure with you. As always, I've got some recommended resources for you. The first one is, of course, Visible Learning, the text by Hattie. It's got some really great practical tips in there and really does explain, why high impact teaching strategies are so important. Of course, the Victorian Department of Education and Training has a really great high impact teaching strategies booklet, and I've put the links for both of those two things in the show notes below. You can find Adventurous Minds and me on Teachers Pay Teachers. We've got some really great resources that will help you to do these sorts of high impact teaching strategies in your classroom. We're putting together a really great package on metacognitive strategies at the moment too, so watch out for that one. You can also find us on Instagram, and of course, you can re-listen to this particular video on your favorite podcast app if you would prefer to pop us in your headphones while you work on some other bits and pieces. And again, the links to that is in the show notes below as well. Thank you so much for joining me on this high impact teaching strategy journey. Hit the follow button, the subscribe button, and the little bell to make sure that you get your top teacher tips every Thursday. How's that for some alliteration? And we look forward to joining your teaching adventure again next week. Have a great week.